Emergency Management Theory by Ricky Harris. First, we'll start off this presentation and ask a very simple question. Does it exist? Well, frankly, yes it does. Now, exactly what it is emergency management theory is an organized analysis of planning, decision-making, and the assignment of available resources to satisfy the four phases of emergency management. The key word in this is analysis. In order to understand this theory, we must first understand what is emergency management and its four phases. The first of the four phases is mitigation. This is the process that occurs before the emergency or disaster for the purposes of eliminating or reducing the probability of the occurrence from doing more damage than necessary. This includes actions to postpone, dissipate, or lessen the effect. For example, creating levees in low-lying areas. The second phase is preparedness. This is designed to minimize disaster damages for the purposes of enhancing disaster response operations. Prepared organizations and individuals to respond examples include stocking up on food and non-perishables and boarding up windows. The third phase is response. The purpose of this is to provide emergency assistance in order to reduce probability of additional injuries or damage. There are three responses to recovery. Bottom up, the most preferred, which goes from local officials to state officials to federal. Top down, which does the opposite, and mass confusion. Responses include water distribution areas, temporary shelters, and medical treatment for the injured. The fourth phase is recovery. The purpose of this is to return systems to normal levels. There are two timetables for recovery. Short term, which returns vital systems in approximately 2 weeks, include electricity, water, and plumbing. Then there's long term, which stabilizes all systems and can take years. These include rebuilding homes, cleanup, and insurance claims to be processed and initiated. Now, what is the purpose of the emergency management system? Emergency management's purpose is to save lives, prevent injuries, and protect property and environment if an emergency occurs. Now, when would you apply this theory? 1. During emergency, which is a dangerous event that normally can be managed at the local level. A disaster, which is a dangerous event that causes significant human and economic loss and demands a crisis response beyond the scope of any single agency or jurisdiction. And a hazard, which is a dangerous event or circumstance that has the potential to lead to an emergency or disaster. Now, there are two types of disasters. A natural hazard, caused by natural events, like a hurricane, earthquake, or a volcano, or a technological hazard, caused by tools, machines, and substances. All of these are always caused by man. For example, a nuclear meltdown at a nuclear power plant. Now, who are the officials and what are their roles and responsibilities? In an emergency, operating in a multiple agency environment is ideal. Organizational roles in each phase must be clearly defined and coordinated for the process to work efficiently. The first official are the local officials. Local officials are the first lines of defense. They're responsible for responding to people's most basic needs, like security, food, water, plumbing, etc. It is their job to determine if a disaster is too big to handle, in which case they ask the state government for assistance. The state government is responsible for facilitating clear channels of communication between local and federal officials. The governor of a state also can allocate resources of his own to help disaster areas through money and manpower, most notably through the state's National Guard. Finally, there is the federal officials, which is FEMA, which is a department of the Department of Homeland Security. They are responsible for acting upon a state's request. Only a president can declare a major emergency which would enable federal government to help affected areas through FEMA. It is FEMA's job to effectively communicate with local officials with the help of state officials. Now, why do we use the emergency management theory? We use it to determine whether emergency response can be used to improve or the actions before and after disaster are affirmed. Basically, we want to analyze each disaster to see what are the strengths and weaknesses of our response. Now, let's analyze some examples. First, let's analyze the emergency response of North Carolina during Hurricane Hugo. There was a bottom implementation pattern used in North Carolina, which is most preferred, that went from local to state to federal levels. There are 4 conditions that contributed to this success. First, local and state officials were well trained to handle the disaster. Second, local and state officials had excellent resources and a professional emergency management staff. Third, Information and relief assistance flowed through one emergency management system. Finally, because of these previous conditions, FEMA was able to do its job properly and channel resources and aid into areas in need without complications. The government's response is considered in this case to be effective and successful. Now let's analyze the emergency response in South Carolina during Hurricane Hugo. The implementation pattern in South Carolina was mass confusion. There are multiple reasons for this failure. First, normal response and recovery systems were not equipped to handle a disaster of such a large scale. Second, local officials were not aware of their responsibilities and relied too much on federal government aid. Third, there were two emergency management systems, which created confusion and relief was not reported correctly. Finally, bureaucratic procedures and regulations are of little use in these emergency management situations. Paperwork and busy lines contributed to a bumfuzzled effort. The government response in this case was considered a failure. In conclusion, we use the emergency management theory to analyze disaster responses on an individual case basis. This enables us to see things that were done correctly and things that we have failed at. We must use this to learn from our mistakes so that they cannot happen again. Doing so would not only help those in need with more efficiency, but it can save lives.